On this episode of The Unraveling, How Your Reality is Made Up.
It is what it is, right? And I think we're not making any legal conclusions. That's not our job. Our job is to put out there what the facts are, what the truth is, and let the attorneys conclude what they may.
When you know something and you're putting these things together and you're just like, oh my gosh, I feel like this is one of the biggest things in the world.
And this is a story about people who are saying one thing and something else is going on behind the scenes.
Part of what my NGO does is we work with kids from exceptional young people from extreme circumstances.
Who are you when you're off camera? Who are you in the dark?
I don't think I'd want someone to make a film about my nonprofit. You don't want to see the sausage being made.
Because we don't believe victims. We don't believe the less powerful person ever.
This whole time, it's been in plain sight.
Have things that are hidden be made visible. At least you can see the snake now. This is big, right? This is big. How far does this thing go?
On this episode of The Unraveling, How Your Reality is Made Up. What if your greatest enemy was camouflaged, posing in your life? Perhaps your closest confidant, a family member, or a favorite politician. Exploiting your weaknesses, sabotaging your goals, learning your vulnerabilities. And what would you do if they framed you for a crime you didn't commit? What would you do if they turned your friends against you, convinced everyone you were delusional? And what would you do if they hired a lawyer to weaponize a cease and desist against you? Would you stay quiet? What would you do if no one believed you? How far would they go for a lie? And how far would you go for the truth? A true psychological horror story about how our society is shaped, not by left or right, man or woman, religious or secular, but by predators and prey. Follow me down a rabbit hole of manipulation, power, and psychological warfare, where reality is constructed, not communicated. A journey that reshaped my entire understanding of trust, credibility, and ultimately had me asking, what does it even mean to be human? A story of deception, manipulation, and power so sophisticated and orchestrated, it's almost like it was scripted. This is The Unraveling. This entire series was born from the cease and desist I was sent on August 16th, 2025. Originally, I planned to wait until the episode about my personal experience with the director before diving into the details. But I got a new communication from her attorney the week before Thanksgiving, and it's relevant to the story unfolding here. So let's talk about it. So what was the trigger for that original cease and desist? It was a TikTok video.
They attempted to defame your character, and they are about to be exposed for that. This was a long game they were playing. It's not one simple particular instance. This is like over an extended period of time. They wanted to make it seem like you were spiraling. There was an attempt to defame your character by perfectly timed situations that were meant to serve to pull you out of character and have you either look crazy or in some other way unwell.
I tagged her in the comments. That's it. No long diatribe. Anyone who happened to stumble upon it would surely think I was referencing teen mania. So there's no way that anyone other than Cori would have understood my meaning. And come to think of it, most people who actually have stalkers usually block them on social media. That's kind of like the first thing you do. But I'm only blocked from the official Storyforce production social media, not her individual profile. Shouldn't it be the opposite? Shouldn't it be the other way around? This look under the psychological hood is telling. It's reflection, but not the introspective kind. It's the literal reflection of herself in others' eyes. That deeply resonated with me. I recognized the pattern, and I wasn't willing to let it repeat. After talking to Brooke from season 1, I realized this was going to happen again unless somebody stopped it. And there was no way that I was going to allow her to use my credibility and my good name to lure some poor, unsuspecting person to be her next victim for season 3. I barely survived it. And I'm not sure the next person would. At that time, the only issue I knew about was how the director had lied and manipulated me behind the scenes and how she had turned the cast against me. That was the unethical behavior I knew about. So when a cease and desist landed in my inbox one Saturday morning, I was stunned. The attorney outlined a list of bizarre allegations, which included that I have been stalking and harassing the director for the entire duration of our relationship, over a year. And my very first thought wasn't fear, it was confusion. Does a law firm not have some duty to make sure that what they are alleging is true? Or can you just pay a lawyer to say anything you want? I figured it must be some trashy lawyer or someone's first case. So I decided to look up the law firm. And that's when I realized that this move has a whole nother layer of intimidation. Because she isn't using just any law firm. And she isn't using her own counsel or Amazon counsel. She's gone shopping and found Cori Goldberg Law Firm, a nearly all-woman law firm out of New York City. Their website describes them as, quote, cutting-edge litigators against big tech and powerful predators. And, quote, the first firm dedicated to justice for victims catastrophically injured by human maniacs and inhumane tech platforms. Oh man, seeing that was devastating. I believe that this choice of law firm was specifically meant to cut me off at the knees, strategically and psychologically. First, this is one of the rare firms that is focused on victim advocacy and is not intimidated by big corporations. They also position themselves as advocates for whistleblowers, the very thing I feel I'm doing. They also position themselves as advocates for whistleblowers. That's what I feel I am. Second, their practice areas include stalking, harassment, defamation, and online abuse. Exactly the categories that their cease and desist placed me in. The implication to me was clear. If I spoke about Cori publicly, they might try to frame it as actionable. And I might be staring down the barrel of a lawsuit. And then there was the psychological dimension. Getting a cease and desist from a woman-led firm known for protecting innocent victims from powerful predators, it hits different. Honestly, I was devastated. For weeks, I felt a combination of stunned and like I was walking through mud. I went to the dentist to get a cavity filled, and when they gave me the numbing material and told me to let them know when it kicked in, it never did. And they told me that it probably meant my nervous system was too stressed out and too fried. That's never happened to me before. But being accused of a crime you didn't commit by a very powerful person, that'll stress your nervous system. So that's the overview of the original cease and desist. And I honestly didn't expect to hear anything more from the attorney because a few weeks ago I looked it up. And yes, actually, it is illegal to represent a client that you know is lying to you and weaponizing you. So I emailed the firm's founder, Cori Goldberg, directly. I gave her a link to this podcast and asked that someone review it. I emailed Cori Goldberg directly in that her client was lying and weaponizing the law firm against me and that I wasn't the first victim. I didn't expect a reply, but I did expect they'd at least flag the issue for internal review and take a second look. But I guess that didn't happen because on November 18th, I heard from the attorney again. Now, as part of my research, I've reached out to former colleagues and associates of the director. The attorney's message stated that my outreach to someone on November 17th violated the no contact demand in the cease and desist. She even quoted the provision, quote, "We demand you cease and desist from any and all contact or communications regarding CS, her initials, to her family, friends, associates, or colleagues, either online or offline, on any application or through any website or online means or by calling, emailing, instant messaging, posting, tweeting, text messaging, friending, following, pinging, or otherwise contacting them on any social media platform." Ironically, that's the very provision in the cease and desist that tipped me off in the first place, because it would never occur to an innocent person to forbid contact with people from their past. An innocent person like me would say, sure, contact whoever you want. Ask whatever questions. I don't have anything to hide. That's the part of the generous, trauma-informed humanitarian persona that can't be faked. Notice what the lawyer didn't say. At the time she sent it, 4 episodes of this podcast were publicly available. She didn't demand corrections. She didn't allege defamation. She didn't threaten litigation. Nothing. If the claims in this podcast were false, that would have been the obvious moment to say so. Emailing someone one time isn't harassment. It isn't illegal. And it isn't stalking. It's normal investigative work and normal communication between adults. Yet the message framed even isolated outreach as something that, quote, would be handled. Now, I'm not sure why my initial email to the law firm was ignored. It shouldn't be hard to miss because my email subject line was weaponizing legal system. Perhaps they thought because my language was so direct that it lacked credibility. But the reverse is actually true. Using words like abuse, theft, and intentional deception is a bold move. But if I'm bold enough to make those claims to her lawyer in writing, that means one of 2 things. Either I'm crazy or I'm right, and I have the receipts to prove it. Now that you've gotten to know me a little bit, which do you think is more likely? The allegations in the cease and desist are patently absurd. You can't invite someone to your hotel room, tell them that you are soul friends who knew each other instantly, give them your home address and solicit birthday gifts, and then retroactively call it stalking. And claiming that your client is afraid of stalking from someone who lives in a totally different country? The email ends with this line, quote, "This is not an invitation for dialogue. Just a reminder that you must stop all contact immediately. Any additional attempts will be documented and handled through the appropriate channels." I replied to her email asking if she read the email that I sent her boss. And I haven't heard back since. On Monday, I emailed to ask if she still represented Ms. Stern. And I got no response. On Wednesday, I asked again. Still nothing. And as of recording this today, on Friday, there has been no reply at all. Now, what's the main message that I take away from this situation? The intensity with which the director wants me to stop talking to people tells me one thing. There's still more for me to uncover. This is getting exhausting.
This show is brought to you by Politeness. Are you tired of confrontation? Exhausted by accountability? Then you'll love Politeness. With Politeness, you can sweep abuse neatly under the rug, and voila! The problem simply disappears out of your awareness. Politeness is the revolutionary way to weaponize civility while pretending to care. Now available in 3 strengths. Don't make it awkward. Both sides have a point, and our bestseller, that's not the proper time or place. Because nothing says maturity like ignoring a crisis gracefully. A product of white supremacy, politeness may cause moral blindness, selective empathy, and suppression of accountability. Side effects include performative allyship and fragile egos. Do not use politeness if you've recently developed a conscience. Politeness, not recommended for people who actually want change.
Last time we checked in with the Strongheart House, it was May 2012, and they had just announced that they were moving from Liberia to Austin. Before we examined the, quote, residential boarding school they later claimed to run on the same property as a chronic drug relapse program, let's zoom in on a very specific moment. January 2013. The director is living in Austin with the fellows, and her short film about African children receiving heart surgery has been nominated for an Academy Award. She wrote about it on her blog in a post titled, My Big Deal.
This morning I found out that I got nominated for an Academy Award. A real one. I still can't really believe it. I turned on the TV this morning to see if we would be chosen. We knew we were shortlisted. I hadn't planned on even watching because I didn't want to be disappointed. I hadn't really even let myself want it too much. I turned on the TV, and we got it. I didn't quite know what to do. I practiced a few things in my head. Do I scream? No, I don't feel like screaming, and it will sound inauthentic, and then I'll remember this moment as inauthentic, and I don't want to be inauthentic. Authenticity is the holy grail. It's to the grown-up me what cool was to the junior high me. True, but embarrassing and purpose-defeating to admit I want it. Spoils the effortless effect I'm striving for.
Most people don't choreograph their reactions to life-changing events. They just have them. Do I scream? No, it'll seem inauthentic. That's not reflection, that's direction. She's literally directing herself in the scene in real time. It's the mindset of someone whose self-identity is tightly fused to audience perception. I think it's interesting that she strives to appear authentic. That's not something people who are genuinely authentic have to do. True authenticity is a state of being, not a state of doing. It requires separating yourself from other people's expectations, projections, and delusions. It's a refusal to shrink your soul in order to fit into a required performance of shallow fakeness that we call polite society or professionalism. Because the truth is that a lot of things we call professionalism here are experienced elsewhere as genocide and slave labor. But we'll get to that in a minute. Authenticity isn't something you can strive for or attain. It's like pregnancy. You either are or you aren't.
So I decided to take my cue from someone else to see if it was a big deal based on how they reacted. Except the only people immediately available to me were the Strong Heart Fellows. These are incredible young people that I currently live with who would probably be impressed with what the Academy Awards are. Except they're from places like Liberia and Afghanistan and were most likely too busy trying to grow up and survive Charles Taylor and the Taliban to watch Billy or Whoopi or even Jon Stewart, who is much more their taste and demo. Gabriel, the brilliant music producer in training that I've known since he was a 15-year-old in a refugee camp in Ghana, was the first person I told. These are incredible young people that I currently live with who would probably... He hugged me. He looked at me trying to gauge my feelings. I looked back at him trying to gauge his. It's a big deal, I said, trying it on for size. It is, he agreed. Okay, we got that straight. Big deal. Check. I went into a Starbucks and made a point of ordering my latte with whipped cream. It's a special occasion, I announced to the barista. I got nominated for an Academy Award today. They all made a big deal of it in line and behind the counter. They gave me chocolate sprinkles on top. I felt lame and happy all at once. It's a big deal, I told myself. The Facebook response was huge, and yes, it was a big deal.
This look under the psychological hood is telling. She's addicted to reflection, but not the introspective kind, the literal reflection of herself in others' eyes. Notice how she needs other people to confirm the magnitude of her achievement. The Strong Heart Fellows, the baristas, the Facebook comments. When no one reacts strongly enough, she declares it. It's a big deal. What's also notable is that nowhere in the post does she mention the subjects of the film, their stories, or the filmmaking process. The emotional climax is not about the work or its impact. It's about being recognized, getting Hollywood's attention, just like she always wanted. For people who spent their childhoods trying to survive Charles Taylor, the brutal warlord who funded massacres, child soldiers, and mutilations so horrifying that they shocked even seasoned war correspondents, I can understand why fancy Hollywood award doesn't really register as important. Because when you are still concerned with meeting your basic needs on Maslow's hierarchy, you aren't worried about award ceremonies and self-actualization. Remember Cheryl Saban, billionaire philanthropist, UN special advisor, public advocate for women's rights? I explored the gap between her public persona and her private behavior in episode 1. A year before Strongheart left Liberia, Cheryl published an article for World Refugee Day in Huffington Post.
Before I could finish writing my piece, I received a letter from a friend who works with refugees. I thought it would be much more powerful for you to read something firsthand from a young woman who has experienced the hardships of life as a refugee. And so, hereunder is a letter from Grace. My name is Grace Freeman, and I'm 21 years old. Today is World Refugee Day, and it's the first one in my life I will not spend as a refugee. I tell you this for one reason today, to ask that when you think about refugees and the lives they are forced into, please remember what put them there. Before being a slave, before losing my mother, my troubles began with war. Most refugee troubles begin with anger and guns and scared people running. If we are talking of helping refugees, let us first talk of helping to keep people from becoming refugees.
Grace makes a good point. It reminds me of the river analogy. If you spend all your time pulling drowning people out of the river to safety, at some point you have to stop long enough to look upstream and ask, who is pushing them in? Although this article was used for Refugee Day, Grace has a lot of thoughts about the word refugee. She didn't like being called a refugee because it's not a natural identity. It's something that someone else has forced upon you. And now, something that someone else forced upon you is reframed as your identity.
So a person doesn't choose to be a refugee, but your government chooses you to be a refugee. So if people don't know what put you there, you have to make them know what started it. So the problem is that being a refugee, a person didn't just design one morning, I want to be a refugee, so I want to go live on a camp and let UN support me. No. The thing that we should look at the source of refugees is your own nation, is your own people, is your own government. So if the government can stop embracing war, can help the citizen to be at peace, that's going to be fine. If the government can stop being bad, things will be fine.
Grace understood the macro issues clearly. But was she right about the specific cause? Are ordinary Liberians or their government the sole reason brutal warlords tore the country apart?
The episode brought to you by unconscious conditioning. Just keep doing the same thing over and over and never learn from your mistakes. I'm sure it will work out this time. Tired of growth? Exhausted by the idea of change? With your unconscious conditioning, you don't have to. Just keep chasing the same approval from people who never gave it and reenacting your childhood trauma. Why face your pain when you can just project it? Because deep down, you love the familiar misery. Now available in convenient, I've totally worked on this denial packages. Ask your therapist if avoiding accountability is right for you.
Back while I was finishing episode 2, I was double-checking details about the NAME campaign, the director's early project selling dog tags with the names of abducted Ugandan children. And in that process, I stumbled on something I had missed before. It was a New York Times wedding announcement.
Ms. Firestone is also a founder of the NAME campaign, a humanitarian project in Los Angeles for Uganda's child victims of the Lord's Resistance Army.
If she was a founder, why doesn't her name appear on any filings or organizational paperwork? Is there a reason someone might avoid connecting the Firestone name publicly to Cori Shepherd Stern, her projects, or Strongheart? The biography in the announcement offers a clue.
The bride is a great-granddaughter of Harvey S. Firestone, the founder of Firestone Tire and Rubber Company.
A direct descendant of one of America's original Gilded Age robber barons. Except the robbing never stopped. It just moved locations. In the early 20th century, Harvey Firestone was determined to secure his own source of rubber outside British control.
And I urge upon the United States to get relief by investing in a country under their own control. This can be accomplished in Liberia.
Liberia was ideal.
The Liberian government gave the Firestone Company a sweetheart deal. That led to the creation of the world's largest rubber plantation and the long-term entanglement of Liberia's economy with their top private employer and exporter. Essentially, an entire country was reshaped to meet the needs of one corporation. That's public record. And then it clicked. I had already seen a published connection between the Firestone name and Strongheart. I found it when I was researching Lovetta's jewelry line, but I didn't originally appreciate the significance. It was a blog post from the Firestone sisters promoting Lovetta's jewelry and Strongheart. It was just one of dozens. However, this particular one was highlighted in my notes because it specifically used the language, quote, our friend Cori, which was unlike all the other posts I had read. Now I can't help but notice it is similar to the language Cheryl Saban used in her Huffington Post article. Why does it matter if wealthy dynastic families are chummy with the director? Well, because in the case of Firestone, Liberia isn't a charity case. It's a profit center. It's one of the primary places where the wealth was made. The profit made from the people at the top and the poverty of Liberia are connected. They're inversely related. One exists because of the other. When people whose fortunes were built in places like Liberia later appear around the orbit of philanthropic or humanitarian narratives concerning that same country, it raises legitimate questions. Not about personal guilt, but about power, proximity, and narrative control. Because the reality is that colonialism never ended. It just rebranded itself as philanthropy. But here's where the investigation takes another interesting turn, because that Firestone Sisters blog post had been online for more than a decade. When I went back to pull the source and archive it for this episode, it was gone, along with a large chunk of their older content. I'm not suggesting any particular intent. Websites get refreshed, old posts get purged, But the timing is notable. Factually, here's what I can state. The post existed online for over a decade. It was viewable as recently as October 2025. The post was called "A Gift That Gives Back the Akawela Necklace to Support the Strong Heart Fellowship." Why does this matter? Because elite networks don't just control money. They also control narratives, and they shape perception, often from the shadows. They decide which people get platformed and which get buried. And in Liberia, those choices weren't abstract. According to a groundbreaking investigation by Frontline and ProPublica, decisions made by American businessmen directly shaped the lives of people like Grace. Their futures were traded for profit and cheap tires.
We were losing lots of money. It was a big deal because it was their own source of rubber for the tires. And it was the largest plantation in the world.
That's an employee from Firestone, Liberia's largest private employer.
This is a story about business and war. It's a story about a small group of Americans and the choices they made many years ago.
We're in the business to make money. So if it's not making money, let's make it so it does.
That's not an aberration. That was the norm, because Americans had been deciding what goes on in Liberia for over 100 years. Okay, here's the history of Liberia in 60 seconds. In the early 1800s, the American Colonization Society, a self-described abolitionist and humanitarian group, funded a Back to Africa project, resettling freed and freeborn Black Americans in West Africa. They landed in what would become Liberia, and what did they do? They built what they knew. They treated the natives as white Americans had treated them, as savages from the jungle, unwanted as citizens, and not deserving the vote. They consolidated power through violence. They built plantations and businesses. They monopolized access to resources. And the native Liberians, they literally didn't get a vote. The settlers became known as Americo-Liberians, creating the same racial caste system they had escaped, but with themselves at the top and indigenous Liberians at the bottom. Okay, quick detour. Why would people who experienced the degradation of slavery turn around and recreate those same dynamics? Because when you've been soaked in something day after day, year after year, it shapes you. You can physically leave, but the internal blueprint still remains. It's like the saying, you can take the girl out of Texas, but you can't take the Texas out of the girl. In my experience, taking myself out of the cult I was in was the shortest part of the journey. But taking the cult out of myself, that took years. I had to strip out what it told me about who I was, what the world was, what counted as valuable, what I was allowed to think or feel. If I hadn't actively pulled out that programming and replaced it with something truer, my mind would still be running their script on autopilot. Because trauma doesn't just disappear when our circumstances or geography changes. If we don't deal with it, it will continue to show up in our lives over and over and over. That same psychological mechanism in survivors of replicating oppressive structures still shows up today. And it will keep us locked in an endless cycle of trauma and revenge if we can't find a way to exit the loop. And here's where I'll probably lose some of you or make you furious. And I'm okay with that, because if we can't look at this honestly, we can't get free. To me, the way the Americo-Liberians recreated the same hierarchy they escaped looks like a trauma response. Safety becomes the number one need. And becoming the oppressor feels consciously or unconsciously like the safest way to meet that need. We can see parallels of this in post-Holocaust politics. The horrors of the Holocaust do not grant moral permission to recreate displacement, apartheid, or collective punishment against another people, including Palestinians. Prior victimization does not give anyone a blank check to become the abuser. That's how the cycle repeats. And until we can understand and interrupt the dynamics at play, we are doomed to keep repeating them. All right, detour over. Back to Liberia, sometimes called America's stepchild, because throughout its history, the U.S. has provided both military assistance to quash potential rebellions and millions of dollars in foreign aid, money that was often embezzled by government elites. So America has been involved in Liberia's affairs from the very beginning, and Liberian violence and war can't be separated from its origins in American colonialism. For another demonstration of how history repeats itself unless we learn from it, we can look at the first time Liberia and Firestone were called out for enslaving the locals and violating their human rights, way back in the 1930s. How did Firestone respond? With a PR campaign, of course. One message said,
"To the little republic of Liberia, Firestone has brought a new day of hope and advancement. It has been a gratifying thought to us that by means of commercial progress we have been of service to mankind."
Tell me that doesn't sound like every modern development through enterprise pitch we've ever heard, Strongheart included. Until 1980, Liberia was controlled by descendants of those original settlers. They gave U.S. companies sweetheart deals on land and resources, and in return, they got political backing and aid. And chief among those companies was Firestone. A family company at the time, its profits at points were reportedly 3 times the entire government budget. Firestone and the Liberian government were far more entangled than is normal.
And the revenues were absolutely crucial. So what would happen would be that the government, when it ran out of money, would anticipate the revenues. They would get Firestone to pay future revenues up front. So the government was always in hock to Firestone.
It was a mutually beneficial arrangement.
In 1980, there's a military coup by one of the original ethnic groups. They're fed up with the injustice, so they kill the president, then take his whole cabinet to the beach and execute them. For the first time, a member of one of the native tribes is now president. If that had happened at any other time, the U.S. response might have been different. But this is 1980, and the Cold War is the only thing on America's mind. Reagan is happy to support the new government financially in return for them being a pawn in the Cold War. Liberia votes with the U.S. and provides them staging areas for the military. In return, Reagan more than triples the aid budget. But what happens when the Cold War is over? What happens when Liberia isn't useful to America anymore? Barely 1 month after the Berlin Wall falls down, American-educated Charles Taylor lit a match that burned the entire country down. A smooth-talking charmer, Taylor had been educated in Boston before joining the new post-coup government. In charge of government procurement, he used his position to embezzle over $1 million. In 1983, he flees to the U.S. to escape prosecution, but the next year, the U.S. Marshals arrest him, and he's sent to prison to await extradition. But that never happens, because the following year, he escapes under mysterious circumstances.
Charles Taylor makes a rather dramatic prison break from a jail in Massachusetts, along with several other inmates. All of those inmates are eventually captured. Taylor is not, and regales in the afterwards that it was the CIA who helped break him out of that prison because he was destined to lead.
So the U.S. breaks Charles Taylor out of prison. Why? They didn't do that for no reason. I'd like to offer a suggested analysis of the situation, one which I haven't found explicitly stated elsewhere, and trigger warning here for domestic violence. In domestic violence cases, it's well known that a battered woman is in the most danger when she tries to leave her abuser. Studies show that women who leave are at a 75% greater risk of being killed by their batterers than those who stay. And the vast majority of domestic violence-related homicides occur during or shortly after separation. That's because the abuser's loss of power and control can trigger extreme reactions. I'd like to argue that the same mechanism behind abusive men killing women for leaving them is the same mechanism behind why America broke Charles Taylor out of prison and unleashed him on Liberia. The American ego was injured by Liberia's attempts to reject colonial rule, and it had to retaliate. Because Charles Taylor didn't do it alone. He had help not only from American intelligence, who broke him out of prison and arranged safe travel out of the country, he also needed funding, and he got it from Firestone. A special Frontline and ProPublica investigation pieced together through internal documents, confidential State Department cables, and interviews with the players lays it out.
The meetings actually took place in Akron in 1990, at the old big Firestone headquarters, the big building there in Akron. The discussions focused on what to do next. Would you have to deal with Charles Taylor? Could you do that?
The board of directors sat down to discuss its options.
They wanted to stay in business, and they would do whatever is necessary to stay in business.
They were prepared to do Taylor's bidding.
December 17th, 1991. The board agreed to make a deal with Taylor.
The fact that a few unelected people sitting in Ohio have the power and the capital to affect an entire country without their say is a big part of the problem. It's a modern form of colonialism.
They understood that the plantation effectively had a new boss.
Taylor's the mayor. Okay. We actually called him Mr. President on the plantation. That was his title. I was impressed with the man. He was articulate. He spoke well. He talked about his plans for Liberia. I felt that this gentleman was, and I call him a gentleman because he acted like one when I saw him, was going to definitely be the future president of Liberia.
That was Firestone's controller, their head accountant. And that comment says everything about the gulf between corporate experience and civilian reality. He's proudly saying on national television that a genocidal warlord was a gentleman because he didn't murder and cannibalize people right in front of him. I mean, if that's the standard for gentlemen, that explains a lot, actually.
Throughout the summer of 1992, the Firestone managers worked hard to get along with Taylor. Taylor said that Firestone gave him economic and political capital at a critical juncture in the war.
So it became, at that particular time, our most significant principal source of foreign exchange.
Even though Firestone arguably held more power than any other institution in Liberia, they claimed they were powerless to prevent Taylor from occupying their headquarters and disavowed any collaboration, although multiple witnesses at the time dispute that.
The company remains the largest private employer in Liberia.
Do I think they have blood on their hands? Yes, I believe they facilitated a warlord in his insurrection and in the atrocities that he created.
For Firestone, making money was the top priority. And it didn't matter how it got done. Money was more important than peace, more important than the sanctity of life, more important than not having boys turned into child soldiers, forced to rape their mothers and sisters. If you have to sell out an entire country and its citizens, well, that's just the price of doing business. And isn't that the greatest American export of all? The worship of money above everything else. Taken as such a given and a default, it cannot be questioned. A spot typically reserved for deity.
The accused has been found responsible for acts of terrorism, murder, rape, sexual slavery, cruel treatment, recruitment of child soldiers, enslavement, and pillage.
Taylor is currently serving a 50-year sentence at Franklin Prison.
Although the Firestone family sold the company right before the Civil War broke out for $2.6 billion, equivalent to approximately $7.1 billion today, its new Japanese owners weren't yet making the decisions. The personnel on the ground in Liberia and at the headquarters in Akron, Ohio, were still making the operational decisions, while Bridgestone was coming to grips with how to manage its newly acquired company. Making the decisions a direct legacy of the Firestone family. The rise of Charles Taylor and his capacity to wage war depended on systems built long before he ever picked up a gun. Systems built by American powers, American corporations, and American money.
And I wish our government today would raise this issue with Firestone. I think the Liberian people deserve some explanation.
Grace said that people don't choose to be refugees, and she's right. Refugees aren't born, they're created. Often by decisions made far upstream, in air-conditioned rooms in Akron, New York, LA, and Washington. Decisions framed as business. Decisions framed as philanthropy. Decisions framed as helping. But the river keeps filling, and the people downstream keep drowning. Next time on The Unraveling, How Your Reality is Made Up. Strongheart goes stateside, and the director publishes a psychologically revealing book. The Unraveling How Your Reality is Made Up is written, produced, and narrated by me, Micah Ringo, drawn from the public record, verifiable sources, and my own experience. You can find supporting documentation in the show notes. Join me for a new episode each Saturday.